Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Words of Life podcast with Adam and Kevin. Today, in this episode, we're going to be tackling chapter 12, which is really going to give us a lot of encouragement about what to do when we are suffering, when we're going through and enduring trials, and what's the point of it all? Why should we endure through such hardships? If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so now, and we'll catch you right after the intro.
Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of life.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Again, hello, Kevin. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Adam, I'm doing pretty good. Back to work. Right, fall break is over, so I had to go back to work today. But good day. Yeah, I know, sad face. No students today, so you get to ease into it a little bit. But just trainings and things like that. But
So are you guys on a quarter system, semester system?
I mean, technically we have quarters, right? First quarter, fall break; second quarter, Christmas break; third quarter, spring break; fourth quarter, summer. But I mean, for a high school where I teach, quarters don't really matter. No one cares about quarter anythings, right? So I mean, it's a nice way to delineate. But I mean, it's not like we finished everything by this thing. You have all the same kids. Semesters are what matter for GPA.
The whole year.
Yeah, generally. I mean, for math, I don't lose kids. I mean, we have very few elective classes that are, semester long, but, mostly in high school, you've got them all year for, English and math and science and
all the
history and whatever. So
all the core ones. Very good.
Yep. Just electives might switch over a semester. Yeah.
Yep. Well, things are just bipping along out here. My real estate business is taking off, and I was just telling you about just the kind of crazy day I've got,
Yeah.
When you get busy as a realtor, you can have lots and lots of people that need to be communicated with, all in various stages of wherever they're at in their
juggling, right? Yeah.
And so it's like keeping all the balls in the air all the time. Yeah. It's like, so my brain is like melting today a little bit. So please, audience, bear with me if I stumble or say silly things or something like that. So your grace and patience. But all right. So last week we tackled chapter 11, and I was I guess in hindsight I wasn't actually surprised that we tackled it all in one episode because it is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And the chapter itself is recorded in a way that is purposefully not there to recount all of the details of every single one of those characters. It's rapid fire. It's there for encouragement and for our benefit and for our lesson and for us to learn and to just remember that there's so many people that have persevered and displayed faith in God over the history. And now in chapter 12, he's going to kind of tell us
why he does it.
Why did I tell you about all those people, right?
Yeah.
But before we get there, just to kind of give us an overarching summary real quick, give the audience just a summary of the path of the book and where we've gotten to so far and why chapter 11 even happened and what's coming next.
Yeah. So, for remembering the overarching sort of direction the letter is going here, it's clear that there's this superiority of Jesus, superiority of the new covenant, superiority of what you have now versus what the old system was, the old law, right? It appears to be written to likely Hebrew Christians or Christians who may not have been, historically, ethnically Hebrew, but are for some reason maybe wanting to go back or go into Judaism. I think there's a strong indication in the text, and if you think about it in general, why would you want to leave Christianity and go into Judaism? I mean, it has all these additional things. You can't eat bacon, for example, right? Why would you ever want to do that? But there's all these different rules and regulations and things you have to do, and go and make pilgrimages to the temple and all this stuff. Why would you do that, right? I mean, other than if you were very comfortable with it, because generationally that was who you were, it was your identity, right? But the other reason seems to be that, and we'll see this in 12 again, or more clearly, that maybe the reason they're doing that is trying to escape some sort of persecution, right? Early persecution in the church was not from the Roman authorities, unless the Jews stirred them up and said, hey, go arrest those people, right? The New Testament picture is that they were more suffering at the hands of their own countrymen, the Jews, right? So you could see how maybe if I just go to Judaism, or I added into whatever, then I could escape some of that stuff. And so 11, then as he really gets into that, is then, look, here's all these people, even of old, even of Jewishness, and before that, right? He talks about people before, you know, the law comes as well, that endured, that persecuted, that still served God by faith, not by the works of the law. They still served God by faith, and they endured difficulties and could have gone back if they had wanted to, right? So if you idolize, or you look up to Moses, remember, he could have gone back, right? If you look up to Abraham, he could have gone back, right? If you look up to any of these people, they could have gone back, but they didn't. And they all died not receiving the ultimate promise, of the fulfillment of the Messiah. And so that's then going to be his point, is then pushed into 12. Hey, since we have all these people, right? So what, right? So what should we do? So he's using that as a way to encourage them not to go back into that, to stick with what they've got, and to press on. In fact, not even to be happy, but to press on towards that promised rest, right? That still remained. And as we'll talk about it at the end of 12, the real Zion, the real Jerusalem, not the earthly copies like we have with so many other things.
Right, exactly. Well, that's great. And so we just got through chapter 11, talking about this cloud of witnesses. So let's bring up our text here really quick. So I'm just going to read. What do you think? The first,
maybe through 6 verses or so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. 1 through 6. So Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point. Correct. In your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your own blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives." Sorry about that. A little bit of a tongue twister there in the middle. But he starts off, therefore. Okay,
right.
So he just got done talking about all these people of faith, right? So since we're surrounded by such a vast, great cloud of witnesses, so now that we're surrounded by all those people of faith that are all examples of faith for us, and they're witnesses. Witnesses of what, Kevin?
Yeah, and so that's an interesting idea, right? I think it's two things. Really, I think it's the main idea is that they're witnesses of the promises and the faithfulness of God, right? I mean, he said before, right, that they didn't receive these things, but they saw them afar off. It was a witness. It's one who sees, right? And so it's these people who saw the faithfulness of God in their own lives, and secondarily, they saw the promises still afar off, even though they had not yet received them. And that motivated them. They were witnesses of the graciousness of God in their lives and the future promises that he had laid out for them. They believe he was faithful to provide, right? And so since all those people have spoken about God is faithful, God is gracious, God will provide, then what do we do, right? So then let us lay aside all these things. Let's continue running the race with endurance that's set before us, right?
Yeah, since we have all these amazing examples that were witnesses of all these things, and I kind of believe that they're also witnessing us.
Yeah, there may be some indication there, right? That even if they're not actually literally, I mean, what do the dead see? I don't know, right? But in a sense,
indication that we'll be just resting peacefully until the Lord comes.
Yeah, but there's also this idea that they still do witness, right? I mean, when you go and you look in Revelation, right, all these ones that are martyred, how long, Lord, until you will avenge our blood, right? How long until? So there may be some indication that they are there. But even if not, they're witnessing in the heavenly places, right? Even if they're not seeing us, right?
They've crossed the finish line,
Right.
right?
They're witnessing in the heavenly places, right?
They're waiting for us to finish our race,
for sure. And so that's I think what he's saying there, right?
Yep.
That these people should be then what? They should be an encouragement to us as people who endured specifically, right? These people all could have gone back, but they didn't. They endured, they pressed on, even though they didn't receive the promise in their own lifetime of the things to come. And, there's this idea at the very end of 11, right, that is not going to fully get developed right here. But at the end of 11, right, there was that idea that because God had provided something better for us, that only with us would they reach perfection, right? They did not receive what was promised, but only in us as well would this completeness come together. And so they are, in a sense as well, like you said, suggested, waiting or witnessing the completion of the plan, right?
Yep.
And so that's an interesting idea that, Abraham was given all these promises, right? Specifically of the Messiah coming, and in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And then he dies, having never received that promise. Does he know it's happened now? Right? I think certainly he knows that plan has been fulfilled. That Jesus has done his thing. Right, that has now been completed, and that there are other people brought in. That he is the father of this great nation, even they're not the physical nation, right? So, I think he's witnessing and seeing some of those things certainly.
Yep.
And not waiting until the final judgment. Oh, I didn't know all these things had finally happened, right?
Yep. Well, we see athletic events correlated so many times. As examples for us to look at. They're like parables. We understand what a race is.
Yeah.
My son Noah, he runs cross country, so I get to witness endurance.
Yeah.
They run miles and miles and miles.
Yeah.
I've never been, built for that
Much
type
runner.
of exercise. Not much of a runner. You give me something really heavy to lift, I'm there, right? But don't make me run for a long time.
Yeah.
But so while I'm not particularly intimately I don't understand necessarily what it takes to push through those boundaries and those endurance races. I understand what perseverance looks like, just in the race of life, which is really what we're talking about. But running with endurance, the race that is set before us, that is this life we have to get through.
Yeah.
Right. And we are running that race as the children of God. Now, on one, when I think about all of the word picture that's kind of used here, I actually do picture an actual running race. And I picture these cloud of witnesses that have already crossed the finish line in the past, but they're waiting. They're like in the holding pattern, waiting for the final ceremony, where all of the white robes and ribbons are going to be awarded,
Sure. Yeah.
So they're witnessing our race while we push through. And like you said, at the end of chapter 11, they're not going to be made perfect apart from us.
Right.
We're all going to obtain that perfection together through Jesus.
That's right. And that's, I think, a really good segue there into 2 then, right? And so he's listed in chapter 11 all these great examples of people of faith who endured suffering, who endured things for the hope of the promise. And then really in 12, now he wants to say, oh, and I forgot the most important one, right? And so we have all these witnesses, but who do we look towards? I don't really look towards Abraham or Moses or Jephthah or Barak or any of these people, right? I really should look toward Jesus, who's the founder and the completer, the perfecter of the faith. And what did he do? He, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, right? And it says despising here, right? And that's sort of a weird word for us in the way we use that word. A better maybe word that we understand is, he disregarded the shame that was going to come from the cross. And he endured the cross. He disregarded the shame because he saw the joy, the promise that was set before him, just like all these people of old who were looking for, the heavenly city, the city that God would prepare for in this other place. And so that's the one we really look to. That's the one who really endured. All these other people, again, we see this thing in Hebrews of sort of the physical shadow and the real spirituality, right? Abraham and Moses and all these people in their endurance for future promises were types of the Christ, were shadows of the Christ as well, right? They were not the real example of endurance, right? The real receiving of the promise. They were just shadows, like all of these other things he's talked about already: the tabernacle and the ark and the sacrifices, all those other things. And so that's who he wants us to really consider, right? In verse 3, consider him who endured such hostility so that you don't grow weary or faint-hearted. And I think, like we've mentioned and been hinting at, there's hostility these people are enduring. And I suspect it's from their, either Jewish brethren or the Jews. Even if, you were Gentile, now you're being persecuted as a Christian by the Jews. Because, right, why would I want to go back to that or do that unless that was how I could escape this hostility and this
and there's got to be some sort of a negative connotation of what's happening right now that's causing them to want to change their status.
And that's clear too as well, because he says you haven't resisted the point of shedding your blood, and so that may throw us back to 11, where at the end he says, time would fail me to tell of all these people who are sawn in two and murdered with the sword, and you haven't endured that kind of stuff, right? I mean, obviously not because you're listening. You're reading this letter, right? So you've not resisted to that point, not to the point that Jesus did. And so he almost suggests you should consider the physical things you're suffering. You should consider those as discipline from the Lord, right? Now, that's not saying that God is bringing the Jews to punish these people in some sort of way, right? But he's saying, look, we did not get into Christianity, we did not become sons of God to escape discipline, right? And he then throws back to, this is from the Proverbs, right? If you're his readers, right? If you're interested in the Old Testament and old things, right? Then here, look what the Proverbs say, right? Like he's done so many times. Hey, the Lord loves the one he disciplines, and he chastises every son that he receives, right? So you should certainly expect that you're going to endure physical difficulties and hardships, right? And just recognize that's not God forsaking you. God does not forsake us. And when you suffer things, it's not him forsaking you. He disciplines those he loves, right? And so we should we count it all joy, right? We fall into various persecutions, right?
So on one hand, this is probably one of the core diametrically opposed concepts that the Bible has. It brings up a lot. Is the idea that suffering is good for us, or that the reward is worthy of anything.
That's right. That even if suffering is not good, that the reward far outshines it, right?
Paul himself said, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Right. And he was in prison, and he suffered a lot.
And we can certainly add him to the list here, right? Of people of faith, right? And he
Yeah.
does in another place, right? Been stoned and cast in the sea and left for dead and received beatings, and right.
He puts it to writing everything that he went through to endure, but he was able to do that only because he looked to Jesus. And tried to embody all of the things that Jesus did. And Jesus, it says, for the joy that was set before him. What joy was that? What joy could there possibly be for us to endure the cross like Jesus did?
And certainly for Jesus, right, the joy that was before him, or the thing that was promised in front of him, if you will, right, it was the exaltation, right? There's no and this is over and over again through the New Testament message, for sure, that there is no exaltation without the cross, right? That he suffers these things, and then God gives him a name that is exalted above all names.
But it wasn't just he was going to be exalted, but Jesus wasn't motivated necessarily by that.
Sure,
his love for us was what was driving him.
And his motivation.
He went, like for example, Jerusalem,
like
Jerusalem. How many times I want to just take you under my wing and make all things right for you. He sacrificed himself. The joy was that by doing this, he's going to pave the way for all people, that entire cloud of witnesses, all of the people that believed in him during the time he was alive, and everybody into the future.
Yeah, he's going to perfect and complete
Right?
that, right? As we saw in 11,
And
there's no perfection
that
without us.
was the joy that was set before him. So what is the joy that we need to set before our eyes, enabling us to endure all of the things that this life can throw at us? These people were receiving from sinners such hostility, right? That was Jesus endured from sinners such hostility, right? But we're gonna expect to receive the same types of things throughout our lives, whether it's from the government or from other sinners or from people. We're gonna get persecuted from Satan wanting to try to, sift us like wheat.
Yeah, right. And we should certainly expect that. I mean, that's what Jesus told the disciples, right, when he was there, right?
Yep.
The servant is not greater than his master, right? If they persecuted me, they're certainly going to persecute you as well. And so, again, right, how do we try and avoid that today, right? I think it's the same kind of thing. Like, I've never been tempted to go into Judaism to escape persecution, right?
Right.
Because that's not where my persecution comes from. But certainly we're tempted all the time to say, well, if I could just mold in more like the rest of the world, right? Like the ones that are persecuting me, then I could escape some of that persecution.
Yeah.
And that's really the message of Hebrews, right? Is that
if I can blend in with the world,
right,
then they won't know, and then they won't persecute me for it.
Yeah, if I can blend with my persecutors, then I will not be persecuted, right?
Yeah.
What seems to be the idea there. But right, what do you gain from that, right? I gain worldly whatever, right? Well, Jesus is superior, right? I gain worldly comfort. Jesus has a better comfort. I gain rest here. Well, there's a better rest that remains, right? And so the message kind of is the same, even if I'm not wanting to drift in those other things. And we'll see maybe a little bit of that a little bit further as well. But I think that's kind of the key thing here. And so he's going to turn his attention to then, right? Well, let's talk about this discipline and what it brings and why we should expect it. And he'll talk about that here. Like we said, Jesus says we should expect it. And the author of Hebrews is going to say the same thing here down in this next section. So
go ahead and pick it up at 7 there.
Yeah. So for it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And so, right, as he picks up on this idea of, hey, let's just consider the things we suffer as discipline from the Lord, right? And so he draws a parallel there, right? And the idea is that if you have children, sons are disciplined by their fathers, right? It is a universal sharing that children share in, they have in common, right? That they all endure discipline from their fathers. And here he says, if you don't have discipline, if you were not disciplined by your father, why was that? Well, it's because your father considers you illegitimate, right? You were not his son. You were an illegitimate child. And so look, if we endured discipline from our physical fathers and we respected them for it, then certainly we should receive it from our heavenly Father and love him for it even more, right? And there's some reasons why in the superior vein that he's been going on, right? Your father ever discipline you wrong, right? Anytime your physical father ever made a mistake in his discipline towards you, certainly, right? Like we can think of examples. I mean, I will tell kids on the first day of class. Now, I'm not disciplining them the same way as my father might have disciplined me, but I tell kids in the first day of class, we're going over rules and things, or the second day. Listen, if I walk by your desk and I say, hey man, stop talking. Let's say I'm wrong and you weren't actually talking. Just take it. Right? Just take it, because I'm sure you were talking another time that I missed, right? So just take it. And really, what has been the consequence of that? Nothing, right? You effectively got off with a warning. There's no consequence. And then I said, hey, but instead, what do we like to do, right? Oh, I wasn't talking. I've been unjustly accused, right? And he says, look, You didn't do that with your own fathers, right? You said, okay, you took the discipline, right? Even if they were wrong. Is your heavenly Father ever wrong? No, right? Sometimes as fathers, right? Maybe they were angry and mad and disciplined you for some reason. Is that why your heavenly Father does it? No, he does it for your own good, right?
Mhm.
He knows the perfect way. And so he's saying, look, we've all endured physical discipline that we understand from our earthly fathers, and we endured it and we respected them and we were better for it. Guess what? Your father's going to do it better than that. So
Yeah.
even if this is God who's bringing this upon you, right? Receive it and be trained by it, learn something from it. And so the question then is, what do we learn, right? What is it that even if this physical suffering I'm suffering in the hand of sinners, or the things I suffer because it's discipline from the Lord, what am I supposed to learn from that? And so I think that's what he gets. It yields. It's
Yeah,
teaching
right
us
there in verse 11, right?
righteousness,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're learning from it. We're trained into righteousness, or the fruit of righteousness. I mean, certainly the obvious thing is when you endure, what do you learn? You
Yeah.
learn patience, right?
Yeah.
You learn how to endure.
Yeah.
And so
Well, one of the most poignant lessons of my life was to the ability to kind of analyze problems and struggles. And this is just something I'll pass on to everybody that really worked for me, was when you're going through something and everything seems so hard in the moment. But if you can just take just a little step back and look at the problem itself, kind of detached from it, and just say, okay, I've got this problem. Is this a problem that has a solution? It's a yes or no question. If it's yes, okay, so what is the solution? Identify the solution and then go do the solution,
implement
right?
that. Right, sure.
That's a pretty good way of getting through something, because at the end of the solution, the problem will be solved and everything will be returning to proper order. Sometimes, though, the answer to that question is no.
Right.
I don't have a solution right now. Every single one of those in my life so far, in all 49 years of my life, every time that's been a no, it just requires patience.
Right.
They work themselves out
Right.
over time. Now, listen, sometimes it's interpersonal. Sometimes it's, and sometimes it's a long time where you're having to deal with certain aspect in your life that's still uncomfortable or whatever. But if you're able to just identify that, okay, this is a problem that I have no known solution about. I'm going to pray. I'm just going to endure with confidence. The Lord will see me through it, and that it'll work itself out. And so that's kind of what it's talking about. For the moment, all
Oh,
discipline
it seems painful,
seems
right?
painful and unpleasant rather
Right.
than pleasant. But later, what does it yield? The peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. So part of the training process is just knowing that you need to be trained, to be willing and able and ready to accept training. And then just knowing with confidence that it'll be better at the end than
Yeah.
it was at the beginning.
Yeah, and if you're not sure of that, you forget that, right? Then that's when we look back to chapter 11. That's when we look to
Yeah.
Jesus and the things he suffered, and we see that there was
Yeah.
exaltation at the end of that. There was joy that was set before him, even though none of those things are pleasant in the moment, right? And so we look at those things, and I think as we kind of get in the next part, he's going to then tell us kind of what you've been saying there, right? So
Yeah.
what do we do, especially in those cases where there is not a solution, right?
Yep.
What do we do in that case? And 12 through 17 kind of
Yeah.
lays
So
out some of the ideas for us there.
Yeah, so he says in 12 is, therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight your paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled, and that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. So yeah, some very practical application here, some mindset things, just some principles for us to just get going,
Yeah.
And sometimes the struggles that we have and the repercussions of sins and sinners in our lives, we need to strive for peace with everyone, right? And for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. So we need peace and holiness.
Yeah, and when he it's interesting that the different translations there, right? Like 12 in this version is lift up your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet. Other ones will read therefore strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble and make straight paths for your feet. And so then it's like, so there's kind of two different thoughts there. One is perhaps if I'm going through it, right, what do I do? Look, lift up your hands, strengthen your knees, right? Make a straight path. What if I see other people who are suffering these things? Good, then for them I lift up their hands and I strengthen their weak knees and right, and I make straight paths for their feet. Right. And the idea there in that is we don't want the suffering and the discipline, as he says here, to put us out of joint, right? The purpose of those things that we suffer, if we have the right mindset, will be healing and will be the fruit of righteousness. But if we don't, right, if we don't strengthen our hands and we don't lift up our heads and we don't strengthen the knees and walk on straight paths while we suffer, then it will not be right. It will not be righteousness. It will not be healing. It will be being put out of joint, right? If you have weak knees and you walk on a wobbly path, then what happens, right? Then you throw your knee out, right? When you twist your knee because you weren't strong enough to walk the path, right? And so we what do we do when we go through? We strive to lift ourselves up. We strive to lift others up. We press on. We do our best to make peace with everyone, right? And so these are things like when we're saying, is there a solution, right, to the problems that I'm having? And if so, then I pursue those things, right? And if not, then I just get strengthened, right? If I can't make peace and it causes, if my problem of persecution is someone persecuting me, I try to make peace with them, and maybe that solves the problem. And if I cannot make peace with them, then I endure, right? Then I strengthen the hands, I lift them up. I go to others, as he has mentioned other places, right? That we stir one another up to good works, not forsaking ourselves together, right? We continue to build in community. And our purpose there, right, is we don't want those things to cause into trouble. We don't want those things we suffer to lead to bitterness. We don't want those things that we suffer to defile us instead, because there's a choice that we make, right, when we encounter challenges and persecutions. Which way will I go, right? What will I do? Will I go back to the country that I'm familiar with, right, as Abraham could have, or do I press on for the thing that's set before me that I can't see, but I see by faith? And he gives us sort of one last example, if you will, here, right, a non-example perhaps, of one. Esau, right? He was profane. He took that which was sacred, his birthright and his blessing, and he sold it for food, right? And why? Because he was hungry in the present, right? That's why, because he was physical suffering now, right? Oh, I'm hungry. And so, what did he think about that afterwards? What did Esau think of that trade later, right?
Yeah.
Until it's right here, he desired to inherit the blessing, and he was rejected, but he sought it even with tears, right? You think of that story, and that's an interesting story there, right? Because he sells the blessing, he sells the birthright, and Jacob steals the blessing. But when Esau goes in and says, "Is there no blessing you have for me, Father?" Right? He seeks it with tears, right? And there is none, right? That it has been gone because you've taken that which was holy and you've treated it as profane. And so he says, "Hey, don't be like that. When you suffer hunger." When you suffer persecution, when you suffer some difficulty, don't trade your birthright for it. Because what's our birthright? it's the promised rest that still remains that he talked
Mhm.
about in previous chapters there.
Well, I think that there's a couple more things in there regarding the tools we need to persevere and to overcome certain things. When you think about drooping hands and weak knees, sometimes you just need to shore up yourself physically and mentally so that you can just keep walking, just keep going. When you have drooping hands, when I think about drooping hands, I think of the countenance of a person that is just given up, right? Just completely right? Like, if it's not just their hands are drooping, but their
Right.
whole you see somebody with drooping hands, they're normally just dragging at the bottom. That's somebody that has they're just sapped of energy and sapped of the will to go on. And you talk about weak knees. Well, how do our knees get weak? Well, sometimes it's over age, but our knees get weak as well if they're out of use, if we don't exercise them, right? And so making straight paths for our feet so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So sometimes it's going to hurt strengthening our weak knees, but we'll be healed afterwards and stronger and more able to endure the things in the future. So,
Yeah, and I don't want us to miss, this is not one that's typically cited as a quotation here, right, in verse 12. But there's a couple places where this idea is expressed in the Old Testament. Isaiah, actually, it's almost a direct quote from Isaiah 35, right? And so in Isaiah 35, it's talking about the wilderness, the dry land will be glad, the desert will blossom like a lily, will profusely, all they will see the glory of the Lord and the splendor of the Lord. And then because of that, because of these things, the glory of the Lord will be revealed. Verse 3, so strengthen the limp hands and make firm the wobbly knees, right? Say to those with an anxious heart, be strong, have no fear. Behold your God, vengeance is coming. God's recompense is coming. He will save you. Then the eye of the blind will be open, the ear of the deaf man stopped, and the lamb will leap like the deer, right? So when we say, how do I strengthen my hands and, how do I strengthen my knees, right? In what way do I do that? I mean, it's not a physical thing, right? It's this reminding yourself that behold your God, right? Remember, be strong, have no fear. Your God is coming, right? He will reward those. He will heal those. He's going to see you through it. So when we talk about enduring, we talk about persevering. It's not just buck up and be tough on your own, right? It's that God will carry you through it. What prevented those people of old from turning back and going back to the country they came from? They witnessed, they beheld what was in front of them that they couldn't see with their physical eyes, right? Because they were seeking the heavenly city that was not built with hands. So even then they endured because of the promises of God, not because they were just such great people. They understood these things before them, right? And what was out there. And certainly Esau, if he had realized my birthright and my blessing is worth more than a pot of stew, right, would have, but he didn't, right? He didn't look to the thing in the future. He only saw what was in front of him.
He didn't value it enough.
That's right.
Keep it at the forefront of his mind.
That's right. And that's what we've got to do.
100%. Yeah. Verse 15, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. It's that grace of God that is out there for us to obtain, to strive towards. And only by persevering and being ready for him when he comes back are we going to finally obtain that. So we getting to the point where we should probably just wrap up and just end it here at 17 without continuing on. Hate to get into the next section without and just cutting it short. So we'll probably just leave it there for this episode. But listen, going through trials and tribulations and struggles and what do they say? The struggle is real.
Yeah.
Right. It's a fact. Life is hard and we are bombarded by temptation. We're bombarded by sin. We're bombarded by and surrounded by people of the world wherever we go. So it's really important for us to find ways to strengthen ourselves and to prepare for trials. And I've said this again, and it's probably one of my more recent soapboxes, but there's so many blessings in the church. And if you don't have a big, strong church family, encourage you to find one, because they're God's people. God designed the church for a reason, and the church is for us, for edification, for building up one another, so that we can be perfected in Him. And so that is my message for you this week, is that surround yourself by the cloud of witnesses that are on this earth, that are all striving on the same path to get to heaven with you. So I'll leave you with that. What about you, Kevin? Any last minute?
Yeah, and I think that's a good example, right? That we do have this spiritual cloud. We do have this cloud that we can look at, but certainly, there are people here who have endured and suffered and can be a blessing to you as well. So
yeah,
I think that's a good encouragement.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. If you have any needs, please don't hesitate to drop a comment below, or send me an email, and more than happy to answer that. Love to have more discussions about the things we discuss on this podcast with y'all. And until then, God bless you, and we will see you next week.